Your dog is asleep on the couch. Their paws are twitching. Their eyes flicker quickly beneath closed lids. They let out a small sound, half whimper, half bark. Then their whole body gives one slow, deep shudder. Most people watch this and smile. They assume it is muscle memory or leftover energy from a long active day. But behavioral neuroscience tells a completely different story about what is actually happening in that brain. Your dog is not just twitching randomly. They are deep inside a dream that is neurologically identical to the dreams you have. And the science of what they dream about will change how you see your sleeping dog forever. So what is actually happening inside that brain while your dog lies there completely still? To understand it, you first need to know how sleep works, not just for dogs, but for every mammal on Earth. Sleep is not a single state. It is a cycle. Every night, the brain moves through two distinct stages repeatedly. The first is NREM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. This is deep, slow-wave sleep, restorative, quiet, and still. The body repairs itself during this phase. Tissue heals. The immune system activates. The heart slows to its lowest point. The second stage is REM, rapid eye movement sleep. This is where everything changes. This is where the brain wakes back up. During REM, brain activity surges toward waking levels. Electrical signals fire rapidly across the cortex and through the limbic system. The hippocampus, the brain's memory center, lights up with activity. The amygdala, the seat of emotion, becomes intensely engaged. This is the stage where humans dream. Vivid, emotional, deeply real experiences that feel entirely true while they are happening. Dogs go through this exact same cycle. This has been confirmed using EEG monitoring on sleeping dogs in controlled laboratory settings. The brainwave patterns recorded during canine REM are nearly identical to the patterns recorded in dreaming human beings. Their eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids. Their breathing shifts, shallow, uneven, no longer the slow rhythm of deep sleep. Their paws begin to paddle. Their face twitches. Small sounds escape, soft whimpers, half-formed barks, quiet sighs. They are not randomly firing neurons. They are not processing leftover electrical activity from a long and busy day. The evidence is consistent and clear. Your dog, in this moment, is genuinely and scientifically dreaming. But there is something most people have never been told about what happens to the body during REM sleep. During REM, the body is not just relaxed. It is actively and deliberately paralyzed by a brainstem mechanism called REM autonia. REM autonia sends signals that temporarily shut down all voluntary muscle movement across the body during the dreaming phase. This is a precise evolutionary safeguard. Without it, dreaming animals would physically act out everything happening inside their dream. They would run, leap, fight, and chase, entirely unconscious, completely unaware of everything around them. This is why your dog's paws twitch and their legs paddle, but they do not sprint across the room. The brain is fully and actively running. The body is held completely in place. Both are happening at the same time. When REM autonia fails, when the mechanism misfires, sleepwalking occurs. In humans, in dogs, in most dreaming mammals. Think about what that actually means. The same neural architecture generating your dreams each night is running inside your dog right now. The same biology, the same structures, the same fundamental process. The distance between you is smaller than most people ever consider. And that leads directly to the question researchers could not stop asking once they understood how deeply dogs actually dream. If the brain is running at nearly waking intensity during REM sleep, what exactly is it running toward? But here is where it gets really interesting, and where the science becomes genuinely difficult to sit with. In 2001, neuroscientists at MIT published a study that changed how researchers understood memory, sleep, and the animal brain. The team, led by Matthew Wilson and Kenway Louie, was working with rats, not dogs, in a controlled laboratory setting. They trained the rats to run a specific maze during the day, a route with turns and patterns the animals had never seen. While the rats ran, the researchers monitored hippocampal activity in precise detail, tracking exactly which neurons fired and in what sequence. Then the rats went to sleep. The researchers kept every sensor running and continued to watch. During REM sleep, the hippocampal neurons began firing again. Not randomly. Not in a new pattern invented during sleep. They fired in the exact same sequence as when the rats had run the maze just hours earlier that day. The sleeping brain was not resting from the experience. It was replaying it step by step, turn by turn. This process is called memory consolidation. During sleep, the brain does not go quiet. It actively processes what happened. And it does not replay everything from the day equally. It selects. It prioritizes. It returns to what carried the most weight. The experiences with the strongest emotional charge. The events that triggered the sharpest response. The things that actually mattered. For a rat in a laboratory, the most significant experience of the day was the maze it had just run. But for a dog living inside a home, with a family, a routine, and a person who feeds and walks and holds them, the most emotionally significant experiences of the day are almost never about objects, locations, or food. Research on canine cognition consistently shows that the strongest emotional responses in dogs are triggered by their owners. The morning walk. The moment the front door opens and you step inside. The sound of your specific voice. The particular smell of you, which your dog can detect from over a kilometer away and recognizes instantly among thousands. These are the emotional peaks of your dog's day. And emotional peaks are exactly what the sleeping brain returns to. Dr. Stanley Coren, a psychologist who has spent decades studying canine cognition, stated this conclusion plainly and without hesitation. Dogs almost certainly dream about their owners. Not as sentiment, as a direct prediction from the neuroscience of memory consolidation. When your dog enters REM tonight, when their paws begin to twitch and their eyes flicker beneath closed lids, they are replaying their day, the real moments, the real experiences, the things that meant something to them. Think about the last 12 hours through your dog's perspective. Walk through it the way a researcher would. They woke up. The first thing they did was locate you, listen for you, smell you moving through the house. They ate because of you. They went outside because of you. They rested near you throughout most of the day. Every meaningful sensory event in their waking hours had you somewhere inside it, as the cause, the companion, or the destination. Now consider what the memory consolidation research tells us about exactly that kind of emotionally saturated day during REM sleep. The hippocampus takes the most charged moments and loops them, reinforces them, writes them more deeply into long-term memory. For your dog, those most emotionally charged moments point directly and consistently back to you. Every single night. This is not a comforting interpretation layered over the science. This is what the science itself predicts and supports. And in your dog's daily life, you are at the center of nearly every meaningful moment they have. Your dog is not just asleep near you tonight. In the most measurable, scientific sense currently available, they are dreaming about you. Now here is something most dog owners find genuinely surprising and slightly dependent on the size of their dog. Not all dogs dream on the same schedule. REM cycle frequency and duration vary significantly based on body size. Smaller dogs have shorter individual REM cycles, but they cycle through them far more frequently throughout a single night. A Chihuahua may enter REM every 10 minutes. A toy poodle could be actively dreaming for most of their sleep. Larger dogs have fewer REM cycles per night, but when they enter one, the dream sequence lasts significantly longer. A Great Dane might dream only a few times across a full night, but each dream runs deep and long. So if your small dog twitches and vocalizes almost constantly through the night, that is exactly why. They dream a lot. And if your large dog lies almost completely still for hours at a time, they may be inside one long, immersive dream sequence. Puppies dream more frequently than adult dogs. This makes precise neurological sense given what we know about memory consolidation. Every single day is full of first experiences for a puppy, new smells, new sounds, new faces, new textures, new rules. Their brains are working at an extraordinary pace during sleep, processing and storing an enormous volume of brand new information. Older dogs also show increased REM frequency in certain studies, but for reasons that are worth understanding carefully. Because not all changes in a dog's dreaming behavior are simply a sign of a busy, well-lived day. Most dreaming dogs show gentle, brief movements, small twitches, quiet sounds, a peaceful expression. That is normal and healthy. But some dogs show something noticeably different: intense thrashing, sharp vocalizations, sudden distressed waking, or chronically disrupted sleep. If your dog's sleep patterns have shifted, if dreaming behavior has become more physically intense or more frequent than before, this can sometimes be an early observable signal of canine cognitive dysfunction, a neurological condition with close parallels to Alzheimer's disease. It can also reflect chronic anxiety, a stress response that does not fully deactivate during sleep, keeping the system on constant alert. Disrupted REM sleep is one of the earliest behavioral changes seen in dogs experiencing cognitive decline or persistent emotional stress. The dreams themselves are not the problem, but the pattern of how your dog dreams carries real and meaningful information. There is also something the research reveals about dream content that goes beyond species or the size of dog you have. The emotional quality of a dog's relationship with their owner appears to directly shape the emotional quality of their sleep. Dogs with secure, stable attachments, dogs that feel genuinely safe in their home and with their person, tend to sleep more peacefully. Dogs under chronic stress, persistent anxiety, or living in an unstable environment show measurably different and more disrupted REM patterns. What you bring into your dog's day does not stay there. It follows them into their sleep and shapes what they replay. If you notice significant changes in your dog's sleep behavior, especially in a dog over 7 or 8 years old, it is worth a careful conversation with your veterinarian. Your dog's dreams can tell you more than you might expect, because your dog cannot tell you directly when something is wrong. But their behavior during sleep, if you know what to watch for, can. So the next time you look over at your dog, curled up somewhere near you, paws beginning to move, you are not watching random muscle activity. You are not watching a brain idling without purpose or direction. You are watching a mind that works the way yours does, doing precisely what your mind does every single night. Consolidating the day, replaying the moments that mattered, holding on to the experiences that meant something real. And in your dog's life, the experiences that mean something real almost always have the same thing at the center of them. They happen with you, your presence, your voice, your smell, your movement through their world. The walk this morning, the sound of your key in the door, the moment you sat down and they moved closer without being called. These are not small moments to your dog. They are not background details in a busy and forgettable day. They are the whole point. They are what the day was built around. They are what gets replayed. Right now, behind those closed eyes and softly twitching paws, your dog is living through those moments again. The hippocampus does not lie about what mattered. It replays what the emotional system flagged as significant and worth keeping. For your dog, that signal fires most reliably when you are in the picture. Every night, without hesitation. This is not a story we tell ourselves because we want to believe our dogs love us. The evidence points here. The MIT research, the EEG studies, the canine cognition literature, they all converge on the same basic conclusion. Your dog thinks about you while they are awake. And when they finally sleep, they take you in there with them. There is something in that worth sitting with quietly. Something that does not need much more explanation than that. Your dog chose to fall asleep near you. And in the dreaming version of their world, they chose you again. Not the couch. Not the warm patch near the radiator. Not the pile of laundry abandoned on the floor. You. You are the recurring character in their dreams. The face the sleeping brain keeps finding its way back to. Think about what you now know that you did not know when this video began. The twitching has a name and a cause. The dreaming is not metaphor. It is EEG confirmed, hippocampally driven, and aimed, at least in part, directly at you. You have been inside your dog's dream world this entire time. You just did not have the science to know it. Now you do. And the next time those paws start to move while they sleep, you will know exactly what that means. Not because the story is comforting, because the research is clear, because the neuroscience points directly here. Your dog is dreaming about you. That is not poetry. That is just what the evidence says. If this changed how you see your sleeping dog, even slightly subscribe to this channel. We explore the science behind the bond between dogs and their owners. And there's a lot more where this came from. Drop a comment below. Does your dog dream? Do they twitch, make sounds, wake suddenly? Tell me what your dog does. Because the next video is about something that happens while your dog is wide awake and watching you across the room. Why they stare, what is happening neurologically in that moment, and why the answer is stranger than you would expect.